What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Commander Deck Tech video, this time featuring Adeline Resplendent Cathar. My name is Nathan, and this is the Salty Productions YouTube channel. If you like content like this, please consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing. I make content like this on the regular, so you can be sure to get all of those updates by hitting that subscribe button. So with that out of the way, Adeline is a mono-white humans commander, which fits into more of the aggro or mid-range style within the commander archetypes. She is a 3-mana star 4 legendary human knight with vigilance. Adeline's power is equal to the number of creatures you control, and whenever you attack, for each opponent, create a 1/1 white human creature token that's tapped and attacking that player or planeswalker they control. Now, the third part of that ability is what is most important. It turns out that in mono white, it is pretty powerful to have an effect that makes 3 tokens at once in the command zone, because we can combo that with cards like Beargon of the Guard, which is a 4-mana 3/3 human soldier. Whenever Beargon of the Guard or another human enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. Also, cards like Cathar's Crusade, which will continuously buff your team the more creatures enter under your control. So, before we jump into the individual card discussion, as usual, I like to take you all through a macro discussion of what we're playing from a numerical perspective. So, I have all of our categories here in column C. We have their count in the deck in column D, and column A is the the number that we would expect to see in a 7-card hand. And then over the course of a game, we'll see about 20 cards off the top of our deck, and so this is the number that we can expect to encounter over the course of a game. So our most popular categories here are draw, general cantrips, and tutors, and then ramp, land cantrips, and tutors. This is very intentional. The reason why we are running a lot of draw and ramp is that in Commander, typically when you're playing a very board-heavy deck, you are likely to encounter 1 or 2 board wipes throughout the course of the game, and so what we want to be doing is essentially playing humans that get us value immediately and send resources to our hand so that in case they are removed or the board is wiped, we are still in a position to continue to play our spells and continue to build a board state. So we have 15 pieces of draw, or something that sends something to our hand. The specific count, I believe, is 11 pieces of draw. Let me go back here. 10 pieces of draw, and then 5 cantrips and tutors. Then we have a total of 10 ramp pieces that will actually put lands onto the battlefield, in addition to 3 cantrips and tutors. And then we have, importantly, because we have a token producer in the command zone, we don't need to run as many token producers, which is why there's only 4 of them in the deck as a backup. Rather, we are running more heavy on the buffer and finisher categories, so that once we actually establish a heavy board state with Adeline, we can be capitalizing on that with overruns. And then we have 9 pieces of removal and interaction, which is a little bit low. I think I would like to increase this number a little bit. However, if you consider the fact that we're also running an important hate bearer in the form of Draenith Magistrate, that puts us at 10, which I think is pretty acceptable. We are not running any board wipes. We have 4 protection pieces. There are 3 pieces that will actually save our board state and 1 that will protect us from attacks. Like I already mentioned, we have 4 token producers, and then a couple of life gain cards and a couple of mass reanimate cards, and then Draenith Magistrate and Roaming Throne. So with that out of the way, we are going to hop straight into the individual card discussion here. So, starting with the ramp category, ultimately our general strategy for the deck is turn 1, we're probably not going to be playing much. Turn 2, we would like to play a Knight of the White Orchid type of effect, where we can go get a land, and well, perhaps this would happen more on turn 3, because we would need to have 2 lands to cast this. So turn 2, we might, perhaps a better example would be that we would want to be playing something like a Pearl Medallion, or perhaps an Ambitious Farmhand to go get ourselves a basic. Then, with those resources accumulated, turn 3, we might ramp a little bit more, or we might be perhaps playing a card advantage spell like Recruiter of the Guard would tutor us up a creature, or we could be dropping like a Tokacious Welcome to help prepare to help start drawing us cards once we drop more creatures onto the field. And then turn 4, we probably want to have, be playing Adeline, because in the previous turn we have played a creature, and specifically Adeline does not care if Adeline is the attacker. It just says whenever you attack, which means that we want to be sending any creature that we've played into the red zone, and then theoretically we actually want it to die, surprisingly, because as we keep sending these, I'll call them suicide cards, into the red zone, we can later reanimate them with Angel of Glory's Rise, which is a 4/6 angel flyer. When it ETBs, exile all zombies, and then return all human creature cards from a graveyard to the battlefield. And there is also Ascend from Avernus, where we pay a bunch of mana into X to return all creature and planeswalker cards with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. With the creature we played on turn 3, we then want to be sending them into the red zone, having played Adeline, which will generate us 3 human creature tokens. And normally we can assume that between 1 and 2 of these will actually survive. So we get the 3 human creature tokens ETB. Often our opponents will be blocking a simple 1/1. So for all intents and purposes, we assume that maybe 1 or 2 of those stick around to then help us attack in the future. And then once we have Adeline on the board and we've started to assembling this bigger board state, then we want to be dropping on turn 4 or 5 the Cathar's Crusades or the Coat of Arms, or even ramping further into a bigger bomb that can help negate our opponent's creatures like Elish Norn, Grand Cenobite, or something like Mirror Entity, and then we have Moonshaker Cavalry as well. So that's the general game plan for the deck. So let's start in sequential order of what we want to be playing. Before we get into the ramp pieces, one of the best turn 2 plays that you can make is actually just to drop a Draenith Magistrate. Now, Draenith Magistrate is a 2-mana 1/3 human wizard that says your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. This is a little bit of a salty card because it turns off being able to play, or your opponents being able to play their commander from the command zone, play cards from their graveyard, from exile, from their deck, which turns off so many strategies in Commander. This will make you a prime target, but I think on turn 2 or turn 3, if you don't have a piece of ramp to play, this is still worth it because you often want to be able to shut off your opponent's commanders. They are often the key piece that are holding decks together, and so in the early game, it is worth it to, even if it makes you the archenemy at the table, to take a little bit of chip damage to be able to shut off your opponents playing their commanders. Now, if you do have a ramp piece in your hand, this is in fact what you want to be playing. So this is a little bit on the higher curve, a 5-mana Phyrexian human 5/5 called Defiler of Faith. It has Vigilance, and it allows you to turn 1 of your white mana pips in your white permanent spells into Phyrexian mana, so you actually can pay life instead of paying that mana. And then it says, whenever you cast a white permanent spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Now, there's a few ways that we make non-human creature tokens in this deck, and it's totally fine because a lot of our payoffs actually just give generic buffs to our team. Something like a Moonshaker Cavalry doesn't care what creature type it is, so while it's not a lot of value to be making soldier creature tokens, we do have payoffs just by having a generic board state, no matter what the creature type is. So this card, I have found, when it is on the field, just makes the deck run so much smoother. In fact, if you have a Pearl Medallion and a Defiler of Faith on the battlefield at the same time, it essentially says that all of your creatures cost 2 less to cast, which is very, very powerful. Herald's Horn is very powerful in this deck because it is both ramp and card draw. It's a 3-mana and artifact. When it ETBs, choose a creature type. We're going to choose humans. Creature spells you cast with the chosen type cost 1 less to cast, and at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card of the chosen type, you may reveal it and put it in your hand. So I have gone out of my way to include as many human creature types in this deck as possible. In fact, if we scroll down to the maybe board here, we're running 32 humans, including Adeline. So that is about a 1/3 chance if we break out our little calculator here. Let's actually calculate what are the odds that we actually get that extra card draw, which I always consider if we get one card off of Herald's Horn that has already paid for itself mana-wise, because I'm happy to pay 2 mana for the cost reduction effect, and then we want to be able to draw one extra card to pay for that extra mana that Herald's Horn costs. So 32 humans divided by 99 gives us a 0.32% chance of drawing the human off of Herald's Horn trigger. So that is pretty good. So over the course, generally we need it to stay on the field for about 3 turns in order to pay off with an extra card draw. But again, we are just running as many humans as possible to make sure that that triggers. Knight of the White Orchid is a 2-mana 2/2 human knight with first strike. When it ETBs, we can tutor for a land, tutor for a plains card, put it on the battlefield if an opponent controls more lands than you. Now, here is where I would like to actually talk about our catch-up ramp package. Usually I save talking about lands for the end, but I think it's very important when we're talking about the ramp. Outlaws of Thunder Junction has almost come out, which is why these cards are in red here. So there are Outlaws of Thunder Junction actually added another bounce land in the form of Arid Archway, which allows us to return a land we control to its owner's hand when it enters tapped. So there's Arid Archway. There is also Guildless Commons, which will help us to help enable our catch-up ramp. There's also Lotus Field, which does a similar effect, but it forces us to sack the lands instead of returning them to our hand. But in general, it is worth it to run this as a tapped land because we want to enable our catch-up ramp. And then we also have, let's see here, I think that is it for catch up ramp. Urza's Saga, technically, I think we'll count that as number 4 because on once its 3rd chapter triggers, it will be sacked from the field and its mana will essentially be replaced by Soul Ring, which will also enable our catch-up ramp. So we have 4 lands that are helping us to actually enable these types of strategies while still remaining mana neutral at the risk of putting us off tempo. So Knight of the White Orchid can help us ramp into another land. Pearl Medallion is just a great card for mono white decks because white spells we cast cost 1 less to cast. Sand Scout is a new card from Outlaws of Thunder Junction where it is a 2-mana 2/2 human scout. When Sand Scout ETBs, if an opponent controls more lands than you, search the library for a desert card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. And whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, create a 1/1 Sand Warrior creature token, which only triggers once per turn. So we're running 2 deserts in the form of Scavenger Grounds and also Arid Archway. So this is great because with Sand Scout, if you get the trigger, the catch-up ramp trigger in the first part of that text, then we can search for an Arid Archway and we can actually play that on the battlefield tapped and then return another land we control to our owner's hand. So we actually ramp ourselves twice by playing an Arid Archway, which the land would enter tapped anyway, regardless of what we get. So the ideal play would be to go grab our Arid Archway, and then we return perhaps a Plains to our hand, tapping it in response to the trigger so that we can actually use the mana. And we have actually ramped ourselves by 2 mana and sent a land to our hand, which is absolutely fantastic. Scholar of New Horizons is a bit of a weird card, and I think this is actually the weakest card in the ramp category. So this card is a 2-mana 1/1 human scout. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, so it's really a 2/2 upon entering, and you can tap remove a counter from a permanent you control, search your library for a plains card, and reveal it. If an opponent controls more lands than you, you may put that card onto the battlefield tapped. However, if you don't put that card on the battlefield, meaning you don't meet that clause, then it can be put, into our hand. So this is pretty great because we want to be playing as many lands as possible and we have the flexibility in a couple of different places here. So if we don't meet the catch-up ramp stipulation, we still get the land, even though it's a turn late because we have to wait to tap this particular human. And also it does combo with one particular card, which is Cathar's Crusade, which will put a bunch of 1/1 counters on our creatures. or Intrepid Adversary, which is not good to be taking counters away from Intrepid Adversary. However, there's a small synergy there. So Scholar of New Horizons, I think, is just not as good in this category because we have to wait for it to be able to tap, and then if we meet the condition, the land enters tapped. So it's really 2 turns before we can actually use the land that it tutors. So I've thought about replacing this with just a land, to be quite honest. However, I think it is a human and it is good enough to meet our ramp category here, because this is exactly what we want to be doing. We want to be playing these low drop humans that get us some value that can't be interacted with, in particular lands or card draw, and then we want to be able to have those bodies left over once that value has been delivered to then be able to overrun with them. So because this card fits all of that, fits the bill for that criteria, I kept it in the deck even though it is not particularly fast at what it does. And because we're in mono white, we are going to be playing Smothering Tithe. I know it's a staple, and this is quite a boring card. However, I think in mono white, we just want to be abusing as much ramp as we can because we don't have access to things like Nature's Lore or 3 visits. We're running Soul Ring as part of our Urza's Saga package so that we can be ramping out some good mana once that Chapter 3 triggers. Urza's Incubator is a 3 mana artifact. When ETBs, we will choose humans as a creature type. And it says creature spells of the chosen type cost 2 less to cast. Now, notably, this is a symmetrical effect, so this will cost reduced for your opponents as well. However, because we are running so many humans, I think that this card is still worth running, and it really, really makes the deck hum by being able to just drop so many humans in a single turn, being able to multi-spell, flood the board. This is pretty great when it comes to that. However, just be aware that there are a lot of cards that are incidentally humans, and this will enable that the cost reduction for your opponents. Weathered Wayfarer is a 1-mana, 1/1 human nomad cleric. We can pay 1 to tap it, search the library for a land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Notably, this is any land card. Then shuffle, play this ability only if an opponent controls more lands than you. Now, the prime tutor target for Weathered Wayfarer is, of course, Ancient Tomb, which will ramp us for 2 mana when it comes down. Other than Ancient Tomb, you can also search up other giant rampers like Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, or if you need perhaps some top deck manipulation, there's also Path of Ancestry, or even if you want to ramp out an Urza Saga. So I'd say 99% of the time you're going to be looking for Ancient Tomb, and then after that you'll probably be searching for Nykthos. And then after that, even if you also did need to search up some catch-up ramp to start, lowering your land count, you can search up a Lotus Field or one of the bounce lands. So in general, Weathered Wayfarer, very efficient at what it does at only 1 mana. Then we have I'll cover our land cantrips category. So these will be delivering lands to our hand, but will not put them onto the field. Ambitious Farmhand is a 2-mana 1/1 human peasant. When it ETBs, you can tutor for a plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And then once in a while, you will trigger its Covenant ability to transform Ambitious Farmhand into a 3/3 lifelinker. So not particularly good, but it's some extra little value in case you have nothing else to do. Expedition Map is a 1-mana artifact. We can pay 2, tap it, sack it, search a library for a land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Again, if you use this to find Ancient Tomb, the activation of the ability here is actually mana neutral because we only pay 1 mana, then we pay the 2 to search for Ancient Tomb, put it onto the field, and it turns out we are right back where we started in terms of the amount of mana. So Expedition Map is just basically a better Wayfarer's Bauble. Frontier Seeker is a 2-mana 2/1 human scout. When it ETBs, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a mount creature card, which we don't really have, or a plains card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So we are always going to be searching for that plains card, and I did run a few different tests with this. I encounter a plains card about 60% of the time, so this could potentially be replaced with a Wayfarer's Bauble if you find that you're not hitting that plains often enough. However, we are running 21 plains, and is for that particular reason that I think it is okay to run Frontier Seeker, because we have enough of a chance to encounter the plains. However, there will be a little bit of variance here, so your mileage may vary. So let's move on to the draw and card advantage category. So once we ramp, how do we start refilling our hand? So Dawn of a New Age is a 2-mana enchantment. When it ETBs with a hope counter on it for each creature you control. At the beginning of your end step, remove a hope counter from it. If you do, draw a card. Then if it has no hope counters on it, sack it and you gain 4 life. So I have found that Dawn of a New Age is a cheaper Underworld Connections, or I guess the better comparison would be Phyrexian Arena. And I've found that in general, if you have at least 3 creatures on the field when this comes down, then I'm happy with the amount of cards that it draws, because even I would say the floor of this card should be at least 2 hope counters on it. I found that in general in Commander, you don't need really explosive draw spells for mid-rangey type of decks. You need just enough draw to keep going and keep enabling your game plan. And I think Dawn of a New Age fits the bill exactly, because we are going to always have at least 2 creatures on the field from our turn 2 play or turn 3 play. Then once we drop Adeline, we're going to be making at least 3 creature tokens, and if only one of those survive, we still have probably about 3 creatures on the field, and so Dawn of a New Age will almost always come down with 3 hope counters on it, which I've found is perfectly adequate, and I've been happy with it. And it has the extra little bonus of gaining 4 life once the hope counters run out, which is totally fine, because that helps us to survive some of those burn strategies that our opponents may be running. Esper Sentinel, just a format all-star, one of the best weight cards, period. It will help us draw a bunch of cards, and it can be tutored by our Ranger Captain of Eos style effects, or our Ranger of Eos, which will search us 2. It's in a different category because it searches for 2 creature cards with CMC 1 or less and reveal them. So Esper Sentinel is almost always going to be tutored by these cards to help draw us even more cards. Then we have Knight Errant of Eos. It is a 5 mana, but this is misleading. It's a 5 mana 4/4 human knight with Convoke. When it ETBs, look at the top 6 cards of your libraries. You may reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X or less from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoke Knight Errant of Eos. Put the revealed cards into your hand, then shuffle. So I think on average, we're probably going to be paying 3 into the Convoke by tapping 3 creatures. Again, by the time we play Adeline and then the turn after, we'll probably have about 3 creatures on the field that can convoke this card. And so we can search, on average, we'll be able to search our deck or reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value 3 or less from among them and put them into our hands, which we have a very, very good odds of encountering. Mangara the Diplomat is a 4 mana 2/4 human cleric with lifelink. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. Whenever opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. So it's the third part of that ability, the double spelling, that will mostly draw cards off of Mangara, and she is good just to sit and accumulate value. In addition, I do like the fact that she has a decent body to block 3/3s. That lifelink is just nice to have against those burn type of strategies, and it has 4 toughness, which is very decent. Ranger of Eos, 4 mana 3/2 human soldier. When ETBs, you may search the library for 2 creature cards with CMC 1 or less, reveal and put them into your hand, and then shuffle. So again, we are most likely going to be grabbing Esper Sentinel. And then secondarily, we can grab our Soul Sisters here, Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant, which generate just a ton of life gain for you and can help you survive into the late game. And we can also grab Weathered Wayfarer if we need ramp as well. So there's a few different options here. And then as a last resort, we can grab a Novice Inspector, which is really just a cantripping human, or a Thraben Inspector, which is also a cantripping human. All right, then we have Recruiter of the Guard, which is 3 mana, 1/1 human soldier. When ETBs, you may search your library for creature card with toughness 2 or less, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. This can grab a ton of different cards here. So if you are looking for, example, a finisher, you can grab Mirror Entity, Intrepid Adversary, because I believe it looks at toughness. And you can also grab Gold Knight Commander, Baragon, or sorry, you can't grab Baragon, but Gold Knight Commander is basically Baragon as well. So tons of finishers. You can grab, Weathered Wayfarer for ramp. You can grab all of the Soul Sisters for life gain. If you need a land to your hand, you can grab Ambitious Farmhand. And even with our token producers here, Reverend Hoplite meets that restriction. So you can grab a nice token producer there. And you can also grab you can't grab Draenith Magistrate. I thought he was 2 toughness. My apologies. So there's plenty of options here for Recruiter of the Guard. I think most of the time we're probably going to use him to grab either Mirror Entity or Intrepid Adversary or Gold Knight Commander, because typically we want to be searching for those payoff effects. However, I have ran into a situation where we needed to grab a card to rebuild, so Reverent Hoplite is a great target there too. Skull Clamp is an all-star in the deck. We have a lot of 1/1s. Adeline makes 1/1s. We have plenty of cards that make 1/1 tokens, like Defiler of Faith, Horn of Gondor, Cemetery Protector, Call of the Coppercoats. Plenty of ways to make 1/1s in the deck, and Skull Clamp is just great card advantage when it comes to that. The One Ring is in here. Again, in mono white, we're looking to abuse all of the different abilities to draw cards, and the One Ring is just simply one of the best ways to do that. This has extra synergy too, because we're running a lot of life gain effects, so we can continue to pay for the burden counters, and notably, this can be searched up with Thalia's Lancers. Next, we have Takesha's Welcome, which is a 3 mana enchantment whenever one of our creatures with mana value 3 or less enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this will trigger on all of your tokens entering, and we have several. Most of the deck is actually creature cards with CMC 3 or less. So this will basically be triggering every turn and is essentially a Phyrexian Arena for free. And then finally, we have one of the better cards from, I believe, Murders at Karlov Manor. We have Trouble in Pairs, which is a 4 mana enchantment. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, the player skips that turn instead. So some nice incidental extra turn hate. And then whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. So on average, I assume that this will draw us 2 cards per turn cycle. So this just delivers tremendous value over time. Then we'll step into our general cantrips and tutors category. So Heliod's Pilgrim is nice because it will tutor us up an aura card. And the only aura in the deck, actually, although this can be modified if needed, and in fact, I am considering swapping out Path to Exile for it, is we have Darksteel Mutation in the deck to lock commanders on the board. However, there's another card called On Thin Ice, which will do a similar effect. We would just have to swap our planes to be snow-covered planes, which is a very easy swap. And it's a 1 mana snow enchantment aura, enchant snowline you control. When it ETBs, exile target creature and opponent controls until On Thin Ice leaves the battlefield. So the reason why I mention that is just in case we already have our Darksteel Mutation on the field or in hand, we want a second target to be able to tutor up. And so I might even swap Path to Exile with On Thin Ice. The reason why Path to Exile is in the deck is that in an emergency, it can be used to help ramp us. For only 1 mana, being able to basically ramp us for a plains and enter tapped is honestly worth it if we're really short on lands. But usually it's going to be used to target an opponent's creature. However, there is that emergency mode, which I do appreciate. So I'm still running some more tests. What are the odds of actually having Darksteel Mutation in hand when we want to be playing a Heliod's Pilgrim? So, there's a big caveat with this card. Novice Inspector is a 1-mana 1/2 human detective when it ETBs Investigate, which this is exactly what we want to be doing in an aggro human strategy. We want creatures entering that deliver us value so that we can continue to fuel our hands later. And the Investigate effect is great because if we have 2 mana laying around, which we might have, honestly, in turn 4 or 5, if we don't have our big bombs in hand, we can just crack that clue to continue to draw cards. Then there is Ranger Captain of Eos, 3 mana 3/3 human soldier. When it ETBs, you may tutor for a creature card with CMC 1 or less, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. And what makes Ranger Captain so good is the second part here. You can sack it. Your opponents can't cast non-creature spells this turn. So if you sniff out that your opponents have a board wipe ready to deal with your board, then you can sack this on somebody's upkeep so that we can prevent that board wipe from happening. And again, most of the time we're going to be searching for an Esper Sentinel to help draw us more cards off of Ranger Captain. Thalia's Lancer is a 5 mana 4/4 human knight with first strike. When it ETBs, you may search your library for a legendary card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So this can grab all kinds of goodies here. Like we mentioned, we have the One Ring, which is a great target. There's also Mangar if we happen to have the One Ring in our hand. In the finishers category, we actually have Baragond that we can search up. We can also search up Elish Norn, Greymund, and there's also... I don't think we have any legendary ramp pieces here, so no ramp pieces. However, and we don't have any legendary token producers, so really our options are to search up for drawing card advantage, finishers, and that is about it for Thalia's Lancers. 3-bit Inspector is a 1 mana 1/2 human soldier when ETBs Investigate, so basically a carbon copy of Novice Inspector. Just, again, great cantripping human. All right, so let's then run over our buffer category to see what we want to be closing out the game with. Baragond of the Guard is a 4 mana 3/3 whenever it or another human ETBs under control. Creatures can get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. Combo's great with Adeline because once we have those 3 humans ETBing, our entire team essentially gets +3/+3. Cathar's Crusade, whenever creature ETBs under control, put 1 counter on each creature you control. Just one of the best team buffs in the game. There's also Coat of Arms. Each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares at least one creature type with it. Notably, this is a symmetrical effect, so this will buff your opponent's decks if they are tribal. And I will say that there are a decent amount of incidental humans, so just be aware of what your opponents are running for the human creature type. But in general, this will buff our team tremendously and is a great Alpha Strike enabler. Elish Norn will essentially give our creatures +4/+4 because it gives other creatures we control get +2/+2, and other creatures our opponents control get -2/-2. So Elish Norn always makes a splash on the board state, and I don't think it has ever not nuked several opponents' creatures. There's always some sort of mana dork laying around, some sort of utility creature with less than 3 toughness laying around. And the caveat to that, though, is that you basically have one turn to use Elish Norn. It really is kind of an Alpha Strike card because I don't think I've ever had an Elish Norn sit around for more than one turn cycle, just because it tends to nuke your opponent's plans so hard. So Elish Norn will tend to be is just a magnet for removal. So just be aware that you have one turn to use this big buff. So you might want to take out the player who you most think is able to remove it. Gold Knight Commander is a 4 mana 2/2 human cleric soldier. Whenever another creature ETB is under control, creatures you control go +1/+1 until end of turn. So another great Baragond effect there, where every time a creature enters, we're going to be buffing our team. Greymund Avastin Stalwart, which was originally Rick Steadfast Leader from the Walking Dead secret, I think it was a Secret Lair set, is a 4-mana 3/4 human soldier. When it ETBs, choose 2 abilities from among First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. Humans you control have each of the chosen abilities. As long as you control 4 or more humans, humans you control get +2/+2. So most of the time, I think you're going to be choosing First Strike and Vigilance. However, I think First Strike and Lifelink is also pretty decent. You're almost always going to be choosing First Strike, though, I think, to really enable your team to get through damage. And then I think it's pretty trivial with Adeline as our commander to meet the 4 creature stipulation to give our humans +2/+2, and that's really the true power of this card, is that it's a 4-mana +2/+2 buff with upside. Intrepid Adversary is a card I want to discuss just a little bit because it is admittedly a below rate card. This is not a card that is very efficient at what it does, and I think people who might be obsessed with more efficiency might cut this card from the deck. However, I think it has a place in this deck because it is a human, it can be drawn off of our Herald's Horn, and it enables all of our human strategies and payoffs. It's a 2-mana 3/1 human scout with lifelink. That's very important. The lifelink adds to the value of this card. When it ETBs, you may pay 1 and a white any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many Valor counters on Intrepid Adversary. And what do those Valor counters do? Well, creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Valor counter on Intrepid Adversary. So the scenario here is that we would pay 4 mana to get +1/+1. We would pay 6 mana to get +2/+2, or we would pay 8 mana to get +3/+3. So most of the time, I think this card is going to be cast for 6 mana in total, and that will give our creatures +2/+2. But what makes that rate acceptable is the fact that it enters with a life-linking 3/1 body. So if our creatures we control get +2/+2, that means that this card is a 5/3 with lifelink, which I think is decent. It's not amazing still, and I think the more mana you pump into it, the more efficient it gets. I think the ideal scenario would be to really pay 8 mana to give creatures you control +3/+3, because then the lifelinking body would be a 6/4. So it's not efficient at what it does, because 8 mana for +3/+3 is not on rate. In fact, if we look at the equivalent green effects like Earthshaker Giant, Earthshaker Giant is a one-time effect where you're paying 6 mana for +3/+3 and trample. Notably, this card does not give, Intrepid Adversary does not give the trample for the extra evasion. However, if it stays on the battlefield, then you can continue to use that buff effect. So I think, ideally you'd like to cast this as an 8 mana, really at the top of your curve. However, if you are not at that stage, I think it is perfectly acceptable to cast it for 6 mana total to give your team +2/+2. Mirror Entity is a 3-mana 1/1 shapeshifter with changeling, so it is a human, and it says X until end of turn, creatures you control have base power and toughness XX and gain all creature types. So this is great because we just want to be paying as much mana as we can into this ability to give everything base power and toughness XX. This I've found, even though you are pumping all of your mana into it, it is definitely worth it, because I treat this essentially as a Moonshaker Cavalry that just buffs for slightly less. So for example, if you cast this for 3 and then you pay X is equal to 5, it is still a good deal if we're talking about base power and toughness 1/1 to give your team +4/+4 for 5 mana. So that's definitely still on rate, and there's more upside, and it's just so flexible because that X can be whatever you want it to be. So very good include for our human travel deck here. And then Moonshot Cavalry, a mana 6/6 flyer. When it ETBs, creatures you control gain flying and get plus X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So basically a White's version of Creative Behemoth, and this will give that evasion to help overrun your opponents. Serra's Emissary is a 7 mana 7/7 angel. When it ETBs, choose a card type. Most of the time, we're going to be choosing creatures as the card type because it says you and creatures you control have protection from the chosen card type, which means you can't be targeted by, dealt damage by, or blocked by those particular card types. So Serra's Emissary is great because it gives the evasion that we need when we're on the offensive. However, if our board has been wiped and we're facing down a giant board of creatures, this card will help protect us to turn off all the combat damage from our opponent's creatures and help to deter attacks. So it really says, look, you have to remove Serra's Emissary before you can deal any damage to me, and that is great. It doesn't give a combat buff. However, I think the fact that it is so good on both offense and defense is worth the include here. And it has those 3 white pips, which will easily be able to afford. Skyhunter Strike Force is a 3 mana 2/2 cat knight, so not a human. Flying, melee, which means whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each opponent you attack this combat. And then as long as you control your commander, other creatures you control have melee. So this essentially means because Adeline will always have the tokens enter attacking each player, or each opponent, sorry. Our Skyhunter Strike Force will always be turned on to give our creatures +3/+3, so it's just incredibly efficient at what it does if we have Adeline on the field. That's the caveat, is that we need to have our commander on the field, so this one I would maybe hold until you can play Adeline if Adeline has been removed, but definitely recast Adeline, then play Skyhunter Strike Force and profit from there. All right, then we'll move on to our token producers here. So Call the Coppercoats is one of the best token producers in the game because it's a 3 mana instant with Strive. The spell costs 1 and a white, more to cast for each target beyond the first. Choose any number of target opponents, create X/1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, or X's number of creatures those opponents control. So quite often this is a 3 mana make 5/1/1 human soldiers, and then if we want, we can then pay more if our multiple opponents have giant board states to then generate just a ton of humans. Cemetery Protector is a 4 mana 3/4 human soldier with flash. When it ETBs, exile a card from a graveyard. Whenever you play a land or cast a spell, if it shares a card type with the exiled card, create a 1/1 human creature token. So this is great on a few different levels. First, it's just a tiny bit of graveyard hate if our opponents have a particularly scary card in the yard that we need gone. It also is great because with our strategy, remember on turn 2 or turn 3, we're going to be playing a creature that we want to be suiciding into combat to enable Adeline to make those 3 creature tokens. So most likely by turn 4, we're going to have a creature card in the graveyard that we can exile ourselves if we don't care about the graveyard hate piece of it. Because what we really want to be doing is producing tokens with this card. So what we want to be doing is then take that, Recruiter of the Guard or Knight of the White Orchid that came down on turn 2 or turn 3, and then we're going to exile it from our yard so that every time we play a creature spell, it can be we can make a token with Cemetery Protector. So just some good synergy overall there, and great token producer that can incidentally hate on graveyards. Horn of Gondor is a 3 mana legendary artifact. When ETBs, create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. And most importantly, the second ability says pay 3 mana, tap it, create X/1/1 white human soldier creature tokens where X is the number of humans you control. So it essentially doubles our board state for 3 mana, which is very efficient. And even if you look at this as a 6-drop where we're paying 6 mana to then create X humans +1, that's still on rate if we have a decent amount of humans on board. Again, with Adeline, we're just going to be going as wide as possible. Reverent Hoplite is a 5-mana 1/2 human soldier. When it ETBs, create a number of 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens equal to your devotion to white. On average, I found that this makes between 3 and 4 human soldier creature tokens. So this is on rate because essentially we're paying 5 mana for essentially 5 human bodies onto the field, which is exactly on rate and is just a board state in a can, really. All right. Let's cover our removal category, and then we'll move on to a couple of miscellaneous categories there. So Aven Interrupter is a new card from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, 3-mana 2/2 bird rogue with flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile target spell. It becomes plotted, which means its owner may cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. And then it says spells your opponents cast from graveyards or from exile cost 2 more to cast. Now, with the human strategy, because we want to be so board heavy, I have focused on including more cards that can counter spells in white, and Aven Interrupter is just simply one of the best stack interaction pieces that white has gotten in recent memory. Not only does this incidentally hate on casting from graveyards and from exile, which is a very popular mechanic for decks like Prosper or any sort of impulse draw effects, it will nuke counter spells because counter spells are instant speed, and because the plotted mechanic locks that spell into a sorcery speed, they will essentially never be able to cast the counter spell. So this card is just great. It is simply fantastic. This will send board wipes back to their hand, essentially. Now, the key part is that if you're using this to defend against board wipes, just be aware that they'll be able to cast that board wipe for 2 mana on the next turn. So this will delay those board wipes. However, with what white has, white just simply doesn't have any effects that can straight counter a board wipe, so that is gone forever. So this is the best that white has to offer at the moment, which is why we are running it. Cathar Commando is a 2-mana 3/1 human soldier with flash. You can pay 1 to sack it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So again, just a card that, if we want to send into battle to trigger Adeline, we can then pay 1 in response to the attack. Or if our opponents are blocking, we pay 1 to respond to blockers being declared, to then just take out something that we wanted to anyway, knowing that Cathar Commando is going to die. And again, we can then reanimate them with Angel of Glory's Rise or Ascend from Avernus. Court Street Denizen is a soft evasion piece because it is a 3-mana 2/2 human soldier. Whenever another white creature ETBs under control, tap target creature and opponent controls. So this is great with Adeline because, again, once we make our 3/1/1 soldier tokens, we can tap down 3 creatures on our opponent's boards, and they don't have to be spread across multiple opponents. This can all be on one opponent. So this is great with Adeline, great synergy with Adeline. And while it doesn't remove creatures per se, it allows us to get in for more damage and to help our little 1/1 humans that have entered to survive that combat. Darksteel Mutation is, again, one of our auras we want to be searching for with Heliod's Pilgrim, and it will allow us to lock in opponent's commanders onto the battlefield by turning it into a 0/1 indestructible insect. Lapse of Certainty is a 3-mana counterspell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of that player's graveyard. So it delays the spell. However, again, this is meant to defend against board wipes because we really, really don't want to be board wiped in this deck, being we're so board wipe heavy. That's why we're running so many, cards like Ambitious Farmhand or Sand Scout that just get us value. And then, they can be wiped away. But we always want to be defending against something that can potentially end the game. And Lapse of Certainty, I have found, is good enough because we just need to buy us enough time to have another turn so that we can swing out one more time with an Alpha Strike or something like that. And then hopefully, theoretically, we can take out the opponent that is trying to play that massive bomb of a spell. Also, quick shout out to Mana Tithe. This is in the maybe board. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 colorless. This card is not particularly good. It is really funny when you can get an opponent with it. But because it is so niche, I have kept it in the maybe board. And I think it is possible to play Mana Tithe in a faster pod. Particularly, people don't expect the Mana Tithe when you're playing mono white, so you have some power there. However, just because it can so easily be negated, it remains in the maybe board. All right. Then we have Lorn of the Third Path, 3 mana, 2/1 Human Artificer with Vigilance. When ETBs destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment, and then importantly, tap. You and target opponent each draw a card. Now, Lauren does so much because we get that destruction trigger, and I am happy to tap to draw a card with it after the fact. In fact, I will honestly just tap this every single turn of the game that is on the field, because we always want to be targeting the opponent that is in the weakest position and or who can draw us a removal spell to help us deal with a particular game-ending threat. So let's say that there is a, I don't know, Laboratory Maniac on the field, and our opponent has not, comboed off with it yet. I am happy to say, hey, I don't have any removal in my hand. Do you have any removal? If you don't, let's both see if we can draw us a removal piece to help get that game-winning piece off of the board. And I think this just really, lubricates the deck and makes it run very well. So, great card advantage here, stapled onto a Reclamation Sage. Lasarnak Captain is a 4 mana 3/1 human soldier with first strike, notably a 3/1 with first strike. That's a pretty decent body. Whenever it or another human ETBs under control, tap target creature and opponent controls. So basically an exact copy of Court Street Denizen, but with a better body. And at the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So it's just on top of that, a free token producer. So I'd be quite honestly happy to run this card without the human soldier creature token clause there, but that is just gravy on top. So this is just definitely a great card to play with Adeline. Path to Exile is an efficient removal spell. Exile target creature, its controller may tutor for a basic land. Put that card on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Like I mentioned before, I'm happy to path one of our own tokens to ramp for a basic if the particular play pattern rewards that. If I have a particular 5-drop I want to get down and I only have 3 mana. So Path to Exile, just a great effect here. And like I said, I'm still experimenting if I should run On Thin Ice over Path to just make Heliod's Pilgrim more consistent. But I think right now I would be giving away too much value from Path if I did that. But I will, this deck list will always be kept up to date. So if I do make that switch, it will be reflected if you guys click on the link in the description. Reprieve is a 2-mana instant, return target spell to its owner's hand, draw a card. So in the same vein as Lapse of Certainty, what we want to be doing is just defending against the stack enough to where we can be alpha striking to help clear away whatever problem is trying to be cast. So I've noticed, and I think Josh Lee Kwai from the Command Zone has commented on this, that often nowadays bounce has gotten better because you just want to buy enough time to get the threat off of the stack or off of the field for a turn or two, and then typically, the board states have evolved so much in 1 or 2 turns that the situation has changed. And so I think Reprieve falls into that category, especially with board wipes, because our opponents will, probably tap out for a board wipe for something like Wrath of God or any of the 5-mana board wipes, Sunfall, something like that. And the fact that this can generate us essentially mana advantage on one opponent without going down a card, I think is worth the slot. And we really just want to be defending against board wipes as much as possible. And in that same vein, that's a great segue to our protection category here. I'm actually going to go from bottom to top here. So in the same vein as wanting to protect against board wipes, we're running Teferi's Protection, which will help us survive another turn and can phase out all of our permanents. Galadriel's Dismissal is a great fog and protection piece because we're probably going to be paying this for its kicked costs, which will mean it will say each creature phases out. I'm sorry. Let me just read the card. That would probably be helpful. A 1 mana with kicker for 2 and a white. Target creature phases out. If the spell was kicked, each creature target player controls phases out instead. So with offense, we can phase out any blockers. With defense, if our opponents are threatening a board wipe, we can hold this in our back pocket to save our board. Or we can also use it as a fog if our opponent's creatures are attacking us. So Galadriel Dismissal has a ton of utility here. And also a special shout out to Comeuppance. Comeuppance is a 4-mana prevent all damage that will be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn by sources you don't control. If damage from a creature source is prevented this way, this card deals that much damage to that creature. If damage from a non-creature source is prevented that way, it deals that much damage to the source's controller. So Comeuppance and Galadriel's Dismissal are kind of in the same spot here, but I think Galadriel's Dismissal has better protection against board wipes. However, Comeuppance can act as a fog that essentially nukes an opponent's board and is great against burn decks because it redirects burn damage. And then we have Clever Concealment. So 4 mana with Convoke. Any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out. And again, that any number clause is important because if we want to hold up a couple creatures for blockers, but save most of our board, we can phase out those creatures. It can also be used offensively if we want to clear our opponent's board, or it can be used as a fog if our opponents are attacking us. We can have those creatures phase out as well. And then we have, this is admittedly one of my pet cards of the deck. It is a card that I have wanted to experiment with because I think it is a great source of card advantage while secretly enabling our opponents to attack each other. Champions of Minas Tirith is a 6-mana 4/6 human soldier. When it ETBs, you become the monarch. So we will guarantee draw a card off of this at the end of turn. So it automatically cantrips. And it says at the beginning of combat on each opponent's turn, if you're the monarch, that opponent may pay X, where X is the number of cards in their hand. If they don't, they can't attack you this combat. Now, this card, I think, gets better with time because as cards become cheaper and cheaper and every single mana becomes more important to an opponent's game plan, this will really deter your opponents from attacking us. It doesn't shut off all combat, just to us. So it really tells your opponents, like, look, I'm going to keep the monarch. You're going to have to pay a ton of mana, even if we assume it's 4, right? If our opponent's at 4 or 5 mana or 4 or 5 cards in their hand, as the average scenario, then they would have to pay 4 to attack us to steal the monarch, and we have, probably a big board of tokens ready to defend. So I think this can really help us keep drawing cards over 2 or 3 turns, and it's just a great protection piece that really turns off combat against us. So that is exactly what we want to be doing, to try to help us claw into the late game and make sure that we're not taking too much damage. All right, so let's go over just a couple of cards remaining here. So we have the Soul Sisters for life gain effects, again, to help us claw into that late game. And then we are also running Roaming Throne. Roaming Throne is a 4-mana 4/4 artifact golem with ward 2. When it ETBs, we're going to be choosing humans. It's a human in addition to its other types, and then it doubles our human triggers. Now, if we go to the description here, the number of triggers that will trigger Roaming Throne is 26, including Adeline. So with Roaming Throne on the field, Adeline will make 6 tokens per combat, which is pretty great. And then there's plenty of other cards in the deck to help trigger that extra doubler. All right, so that is the deck. So let me go over some miscellaneous information here. This deck clocks in at about $700. However, you can definitely mitigate that by taking out some of the more expensive cards. And let me see here. So after adjusting for custom mana costs, our curve clocks in at around 3.22. So that's right kind of where we want to be in Commander. Land analysis, we have 32 white producers, 9 lands enter tapped, 20 enter untapped, and the reason is we're running so many bounce lands that enter tapped or to enable our catch-up ramp strategy. Then there's only 1 life loss that forces a loss of life, which is a Myriad Shattered Skyclave, and just a ton of utility lands. So let's go over those lands really quick here. So we've already discussed Ancient Tomb and Arid Archway. Cavernous Souls will help our creatures be uncounterable. Eagles of the North is in a land slot because we can pay 1 to Plane Cycle, and then we can play that land to essentially act as a tapped land. And in the late game, it can help us enable that first strike and that little +1/+0 buff. Iganjo can help us to deal damage to attacking or blocking creatures. Also, I will say our bounce lands are fantastic with MDFCs and channel lands, so we're running pretty much all of them. That makes sense to run in this deck. A Myriad Shattered Skyclave can help us to actually give all of our creatures indestructible for a turn while making 8 power for 7 mana, so that's pretty decent because it's essentially just an untapped land on the backside that produces white. Guildless Common, another bounce land. Kabira Plateau is an extra removal spell. So really, if we look at our removal package, it's actually pretty decent because with Kabira Plateau and Draenith Magistrate and what was the other one that I had? Maybe those are the 2 that I'm thinking of here. Well, I guess if we also consider our Clever Concealment and Galadriel's Dismissal as potential defense against hostile boards, then we really actually have around 11 to 12 pieces of removal and interaction, so that's pretty great. Lotus Field is going to enable our catch-up ramp strategies. McKinley Mesas is an overrun effect if we are not drawing our overruns. Nykthos is going to produce a ton of mana in a mono white deck. Ondu Inversion is a board wipe if we really need it to be. Path of Ancestry can help us manipulate the top of our deck with all of those scry triggers. We have 21 planes. Scavenger Grounds is some graveyard hate. Tithe is in a land slot because I treat this as a tapped land. So 1 mana instant search library for plains card. If you control fewer lands than target opponent, you may search library for an additional plains card, reveal those cards, and put them into your hand. So quite often this will actually draw us an additional plains. However, the floor scenario is that we essentially pay 1 to search for a plains card, put it into our hand, so that essentially is a tapped land if we then play that plains card. And then we have Urza Saga, which is just great because it can search for Skull Clamp, it can search for Soul Ring, it can search for Esper Sentinel, all kinds of stuff. So Urza Saga, just a great include in this deck for its flexibility. All right, and with that out of the way, that concludes the deck tech. So this is my Adeline Mono White Humans deck. If you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider subscribing. Again, I make content like this on the regular, so be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all of my upcoming deck techs. And yeah, that concludes the video. So hopefully I will see you all in the next one.